In the midst of hunger, a poor woman had her last piece of bread. However, upon seeing a homeless person who was even hungrier than she was, she chose to give the bread away. The next day, her life changed drastically. What happens next will inspire you and shift your perspective on kindness. Before continuing, we'd love to know, from which city are you watching this heartwarming story? Leave a comment below, because who knows, this story might inspire all of us. That night, the rain fell slowly, and the air was so cold. A woman sat on the sidewalk, hugging herself, trying to ward off the hunger that had been with her for days. In her hands, there was only a piece of bread, the only food left for her. But just as she was about to take a bite, another sound was heard, the sound of a stomach growling, even hungrier than hers. She turned around, and there, standing before her, was an old man in ragged clothes, his face weary, his eyes filled with despair. She had a choice, to save herself, or to offer that last bit of hope to someone who needed it more. With a small smile, she extended the bread. The old man clutched the bread with trembling hands. His weary eyes stared at the woman in front of him, filled with both surprise and gratitude. "Thank you. May your kindness be repaid 100-fold. His voice was hoarse, almost inaudible. The woman gave a small smile, even though her heart ached. Her stomach had been empty for a long time, her body growing weaker, but she didn't regret her choice. The old man stared at the bread for a moment before slowly taking a bite. His face instantly filled with relief, as if that one small bite was enough to give him hope for life. He turned to her one last time, offering a smile barely visible behind his cracked and dry lips. Then, with unsteady steps, he walked away, his frail body disappearing into the darkness of the night. The woman stood still, watching him disappear. Her hands, once holding the bread, were now empty, just as empty as her hope for a meal that night. Slowly, she walked back to her cold corner of the street, a narrow alley that had been her home for the past few months. She sat against the cold brick wall, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to warm her shivering body. The sound of passing cars and laughter from the restaurant across the street cut through the air. People sat at warm tables, enjoying steaming dishes. The aroma of the food stabbed at her nostrils, making her empty stomach ache even more. She sighed deeply. She used to sit at restaurants like that, eating peacefully without worrying about the next day. But now, even surviving for one more day felt like a miracle. Raindrops began to fall slowly. She looked up, staring at the dark sky, devoid of stars. The rain grew heavier, soaking her already weak body. She hugged herself, her teeth chattering. Meanwhile, her mind kept asking, did I make the right decision? Little did she know, the answer to that question would come much sooner than she ever expected. That morning, the sun had just risen behind the tall buildings. The air was still cold, and the woman was curled up in the corner of the street, her body weak from being drenched by the rain all night. Suddenly, the sound of a car engine grew louder. A shiny black sedan stopped right in front of her. The woman ignored it, thinking it was just a wealthy person's car parking. But when the car door opened, a man stepped out, dressed in an expensive suit, polished shoes, and looking more refreshed than the day before. The woman gasped. It was the old man she had given the bread to yesterday. However, this time he looked different. His face was no longer worn out, his posture more upright, and his eyes radiated authority. "I've been looking for you," the man said calmly. The woman stared at him in confusion. "What happened?" she asked, her voice hoarse. The man smiled. "I'm not a beggar. I'm a billionaire." Her heart raced. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. "I was conducting a social experiment to see if there was still goodness in the world," the man continued. "And you showed that, even in the face of hardship, you can still give?" The woman froze, unable to speak. "I want to repay your kindness," the man said as he handed her an envelope. "Inside is a job offer, a place to stay, and a new beginning for you." Her eyes widened. The tears she had been holding back finally fell. She never imagined that the piece of bread she gave yesterday would change her life forever. The woman stared at the envelope in her hands, then looked back at the man in front of her. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The man smiled gently. Because you chose to give, even when you had nothing. Tears began to flow down her cheeks. All this time, she had believed her life was hopeless. But today, she had been given a second chance, something she never imagined. With trembling hands, she accepted the offer. For the first time in a long while, she felt something that had long been lost: hope. A few days later, her life truly changed. She had a place to stay, a job, and most importantly, she no longer had to sleep on the streets. In front of the mirror, she saw her reflection. Not the woman who was tired and hungry, but someone who had a future. She smiled, remembering one thing that had changed everything: the piece of bread she gave without expecting anything in return. The moral of this story: sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the biggest rewards. If this story touched your heart, don't hesitate to spread kindness, no matter how small. And remember, every act of kindness you give, no matter how small, will never be in vain. Leave a like, share this story, and subscribe so more people can be inspired to do good.